in our new Power Portrait series highlighting chief executives who are shaping the global business landscape. We begin with Marriott International Chairman and CEO Arne Sorenson and the company's ambitious plans for Asia. Let's talk about your company's expansion plans for Marriott International, China, Asia, a huge part of that. Tell us a little bit about what's happening right now in China with Marriott.
Well, we're growing gangbusters in China, which shouldn't surprise you. We're opening about a hotel a month, a little bit more than that. And I think we'll see that we double the number of hotels we have in China from about 60 today over the next 3 years. Right now, the concentration has been in the biggest cities. So in Shanghai and Beijing, as an example, we have 20% of the luxury and four-star hotels in that market. But we're increasingly heading out into the next set of cities, where we're growing with Ritz-Carlton and JW Marriott and Renaissance, and growing really as China grows.
You're spending $2 billion in capital expenditures for basically new hotels around the world. What percentage of that, those dollars, I should say, go towards Asia and China?
Well, our business model is to work with local real estate partners. And so every hotel we have in China, with the exception of one, is owned by Chinese companies. That's where most of the capital is coming from. We're opening, though, let me think about this a bit, about 5,000 or 6,000 rooms in the market, and I would guess that they cost $200,000 to $300,000 a key. That's every year. So that's the kind of capital that's going into China alone.
Tell us about where margins are going to in terms of profitability in places like China.
Historically, other than a very few hotels in Shanghai and Beijing, there wasn't much rate in China. In other words, it was cheap to stay. Increasingly, even though many hotels are being added to the market, the rates are moving up. So now we see in China and Beijing typically rates above $200 per night, and they continue to grow.
You have a new program, and we're going to work on our Mandarin here, called Li Yu, and this is a welcome program for Chinese travelers, not necessarily within China, but Chinese travelers leaving China, going to destinations, whether it's in Europe or North America. Tell us a little bit about this program and how did it come about?
Well, it starts with why it's important. So Chinese outbound travelers in 2011 were about 1 million to the United States and about 70 million that left China during the year 2011. If you go back just 5 years, there were only 1 million Chinese that were leaving the country each year. Within the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be 100 million. So that's a 100-fold increase in the number of outbound Chinese travelers. What do Chinese travelers want to experience when they go abroad? Well, of course, they want to experience the sights and the cultures of the places that they're going. Otherwise, they wouldn't travel in the first place. But when they check into a hotel, when they travel, they'd like to be welcomed in their own language. They'd like to have the comforts of some of their own food. And preferably, they'd like to have some of their own TV or their news so they can get that. Really, this program, Li Yu, for us, is simply about how do we welcome the Chinese traveler when they're showing up in our hotels outside of China. So
besides having CCTV in all the hotel rooms around the world, you talked about food was a big part of it, because it's a common question that Chinese travelers have when they go to different destinations worldwide is they miss the home Chinese food. Right. Do you have any plans to put more Chinese restaurants in hotels?
We're adding more and more skilled Chinese chefs across the globe. Now, just like with language and food, it ultimately has got to be justified by the number of visitors who are coming from China. So we'll have some hotels in the middle market of the United States, for example, for whom they may not see many Chinese guests. It'll be very hard for them to have a native Mandarin speaker or even a proficient Mandarin speaker. But increasingly, we'll find that we have at least some food offerings. And we have things like slippers. So for an American traveler, slippers are not a big deal.
Is there something specifically that you're doing in China to help the middle-class travelers, because that's one of the fastest growing segments?
Yeah, we've got 7 or 8 brands that we're growing in China today. So we, of course, have the Ritz-Carlton, which sits up in the luxury tier, and they're gleaming, beautiful hotels. They are not, by and large, available to the middle class or to the growing middle class. But we go all the way down to the Courtyard brand, which is a full-service brand, to be sure. In the United States, it would offer much less in terms of services than it does in China. But it's also a value play. And that is increasingly going to be one of the tools that we use. I think in the years ahead, we'll probably add another brand that's even more of a value play than Courtyard. We've got to make sure that the rate profile in the country develops in a way that makes those make economic sense.
What's the greatest challenge for a company like Marriott? Because you've got high growth, high expansion, high turnover. What's your biggest challenge?
Well, there are many challenges. There are lots of things that keep me up at night. But I think as it relates specifically to China and to these parts of the world that are growing so quickly, it's how do you go from 0 to 100 so fast and not make mistakes? The answer, of course, is people. But really that begs then the next question, which is how do we find the people that we need? How do we train them? How do we keep them? How do we make sure that they're growing with us to be big executives? We were the only lodging company in China last year that was named as one of the best employers of China. And that's because of a huge amount of focus. But we're going to be an employer of 30,000 people in China within the next couple of years, when just a few years ago we would have been an employer of about 1,000 or 2. So that growth is probably the biggest challenge that we've got.
I want to thank the staff over at Marriott and of course the CEO himself for sharing part of his day with us at BizAsia America.